Hey gang, welcome back to System Breakdowns. As always, I'm Greg Koval, and this month by request, I'm breaking down Daniel Cormier. Now, I'm very excited to break DC down. He's one of my favorite all-time fighters. Look, if you go through his resume, man, what more can you say? I mean, there's a reason he just got inducted to the UFC Hall of Fame, which I'm very excited for him. But it's because his history, two-time Olympian, King of the Cage champion, Strikeforce champion, UFC double champ. And the guy's still really involved in the sport between commentary, working with Eagle FC. He still coaches high school wrestling, which is really cool. And he's just a really nice guy. So I'm really excited for him. But what I really wanted to break him down for was because of the fact that, look, one of the common complaints I get from a lot of people is like, man, that reach advantage is so hard to overcome. There is no better asset to have in fighting than this amazing reach advantage. And I can't disagree with that. But Daniel Cormier is a really great example of somebody who was able to demonstrate the ability to overcome that. In the case of the John Jones fights, John Jones has a 12-inch reach advantage on Daniel Cormier. That is such an advantage to have to overcome that it's amazing the work that he did, and it really showed a systematic approach that allowed him to play to his strengths. And what a phenomenal job. And every fight that he had he put on great fights. They were exciting to watch. I mean, it was really a delight to go back and rewatch all of his fight footage because what a fantastic fighter he is. So today it's not going to be a super long breakdown. It's pretty easy to explain, but maybe not easy to apply, I guess is the best way to say it. It takes a lot of practice like any other system. But, man, if you can get good at this type of striking system, it's a great way of looking at how to approach fighting somebody who is significantly taller. Because literally everybody that DC fought was much taller. So that being said, stay tuned and let's start breaking down Daniel Cormier. Okay, so before we start breaking down individual techniques and stuff like that, what I want to point out is two things that he did, which are really kind of like the critical aspects of his game, and made a huge difference when it came to range control. Because guys were so much taller, he couldn't just approach them as normal because they would hit him, and by the time he'd swing back, he'd never get to him, right? So he had to do something to get more contact on them and start clogging the lanes, giving him the ability to enter. So what he did was he'd do a lot of top hand position and inside position with his hands. Hand fighting was a big part of his game. As he'd come in, you'd always see this. He was trying to get on top so that he could have access to them and deny access back. And meanwhile, if they'd start to strike, he'd be inside position. The other thing that he would do is start dropping his head. He was well known for dropping his head to the right. This gave him access to the single leg, and it simultaneously allowed him to defend a lot of incoming attacks, and he could get underneath and start coming up into short range, close attacks. This was a big advantage. A lot of guys talk about when you're smaller, you want to try to get on the inside of their strikes. I don't believe that works. I think most of the time when somebody's taller, they're going to back up and clock you. So what he did instead was he'd stay inside, and as they throw punches, this hand would shoot and get on the inside. He'd also use that for attacks. We'll talk about that in a bit. But he would get top hand position, and as they threw, he would drop his hand down. He'd cover up here with his right hand, this one here, and this hand would stay on the inside. This kept him protected from an awful lot, and it allowed him to get nice and close so that now he could access the leg, he could come in with these short shots, and he could start tying up in interesting ways. So that's the first thing I want you to understand. So when we come back, we're going to talk about what he would do off of that. Okay, so the first thing you need to understand is as you come into range, like I said, he gets this top position principle, and he's defending on the inside, and this left hand became super important because it allowed him to do 3 different entries, and you were never sure which one was coming. One would be the jab, another one would be here, getting to a collar tie, which would allow him to strike, or the third, to wrap, and allow him to access the single leg. Now, on any of these, he could drop down. So if he did the jab, he could always come back down. If he did the collar tie, he could drop down. But a lot of times, if he was looking for the leg, this is where he was going. He was trying to punch through and just get over top and control the body a little bit. So you were never sure where he was going to go. But off of this gave him a ton of striking opportunities. One of the things he would do is, like I said, off the jab, he was top position. So when you're on top of their hands, it's hard for them to stop your incoming jab. Now, a lot of times he would just do a simple jab cross, ha! And if you notice, a lot of times when he punched for a little bit more power since he was punching upward, a lot of times it was a thumb down cross that he would throw. Not necessarily an overhand, just thumb down. He would also do stuff like change this up so that, as he started getting used to this jab, he would switch to the hook cross. He would do that 1-3-2 a lot, where he would come in here, jab, and then pop, pop, a slight break, and then throw the 3-2. from right here, those are kind of his basic striking in this range. But the other thing that he used to do a lot is, like I said, he would jab and then he would drop his head down, and guys would be thinking, oh, this guy's going for my leg, and then he would switch and come up with these uppercuts. He loved to switch and come to the uppercut to the body, go to the head, or switch and go to that thumb down cross, or even in some cases, then he would go to the overhand. That all occurred from this dropping position. And he could tie these together, so he'd go pop, 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 right? This type of stuff would occur all the time. Or he would start coming in here, and if he got denied for the takedown, no problem, he starts coming up. Or he would come in here for this collar tie and start dropping down, coming up to the uppercut, coming over the top and throwing this punch. Remember, he wanted close range. Now he's inside of him, and he's got a tie-up that he could start throwing a lot of these quick shots over top and force them to retreat out of. Then they would disengage, and it was punch, jab, drop down, come up to the uppercut. Then it was shoot through, try to get to the single leg. If that didn't work, come over top. Shoot through, collar top, pop, pop, pop. A lot of this type of stuff. So you can see how that left hand shooting through, you're never sure which one's coming, and it was very deceptive because a lot of times they just assumed it was a jab and they defend accordingly until it wasn't. Now, we're going to get into single legs in a bit. I'm going to talk about clinching a little bit first. A lot of times when he would do this, if he got the single leg, great, but sometimes he would have to drive them back to the cage. And what you would see from there is, I talked about before, clinching over under position, right? Either he had the underhooks, in which case he was in control, really dominating from here. Sometimes you control his wrist and start throwing punches underneath and start getting ready to set up and then going for the single leg. We'll talk about single legs in a bit. So he would be underneath and use this to get to the single leg, or doing some quick striking from here. Always focus on head position. And if he lost that and they got underneath him, no problem. He would pull them back, get on top of them, and just let them carry his weight in this north-south position where almost like if they were trying to come underneath to get to a double leg on him, he lost the underhooks, no problem. He'd just get heavy and let them carry his weight. And then he would just bring them down and take their back. Or if they started to defend, he would get to an underhook and get to this under-over clinch and let them carry his weight. With John Jones, you saw this a lot in the fourth round, I think, on their second fight when he was, or their first fight when they were starting to get tired. You see him kind of doing this stuff a lot and then turning the corner to back guys back in. This is something he would do a lot. It's just let them carry his weight, and he would just get heavy, right? Just lay on them, let them carry that, right? Like, don't go boneless on me, Sean. That kind of stuff. That's a reference, whatever. So, if he was underneath, great. Access to single leg, wrist control to striking, elbows, knees, right? All this type of stuff. If he didn't get it, okay. As they start to come down, he'd get over top and start letting them carry his weight. As they came back up, he'd go to that under-over, let them carry his weight, and turn them back into the cage. That was a lot of it right there. So that takes us through striking and clinching. The next part, we're going to come back and talk about his takedown game, and obviously that's the stuff that you're probably here to watch. Okay, so let's talk about what you're really here to see, and that is me talking about DC's wrestling game. And there's a couple things that he did that were really remarkable and played to his strengths. Now, he used the fact that they were taller against them, and his entries all kind of worked well towards this. So when he was in here, as he started dropping in to go for the single leg, what was great is he never had to overcommit to it. Even if he did nothing, then this, he wasn't in danger. He kept his head down and safe, and if they backed away and he lost it and he got nothing, no problem. But a lot of times, even if he couldn't get the leg, he'd come up top and get a punch, right? So not only did he not lose, he was able to use this to level change back up and get a couple strikes off of it. So that was great in itself. So even when he lost, he won. And that's a really great philosophy. So he never had to worry about getting sprawled on, because when I have this position here and I'm going for a leg, that's a really tough thing to try to sprawl on or get your foot out of there and stuff like that. And so then he was able to get in, get access to the foot, and start working his game. Now it just became a game of, once I have their leg, how do I complete the takedown? So mostly what he did was this. If I am the guy that is getting taken down and my foot's up here, he would create it where he'd go for running the pipe and doing the dump and doing foot sweeps and stuff like that, and forcing this kind of side-to-side defense to defend against as he's trying to go and dump to the side. That was his first entry. He'd come in here, and then it was immediately trying to go for the dump. He might go for like foot sweeps and stuff like that inside here to help facilitate that, right? Or he might start trying to come through and block and get guys thinking side to side. And when they were doing that, because they were taller and they were busy thinking side to side, it allowed him to enter in deep, get underneath them, and lift them up with the high crotch with a great deal of ease. And unfortunately, most of the guys in heavyweight and light heavyweight at that time were not very prepared for that type of an attack because he was already underneath them from the get-go. When he had it, he'd bounce him back and forth, right? Constantly doing this type of stuff. And then when they defended that, he'd get underneath, lift, and drop. Now, of course, if they started defending and doing intelligent things, he was already prepared for, if I get to here and they start bringing their foot across, no problem, I go for the treetop, right? He had solutions for all that because he had years of wrestling. But I don't think it takes decades of wrestling at the highest level to be able to achieve chain wrestling. What it takes is a little bit of thoughtfulness, preparation, and practice. If you go to my Nemean fight system, I talk about my chain wrestling takedown system that I use. Since I started employing this sort of a practice, my success rate in takedowns has increased dramatically. I can't even express what a difference it is. That combined with my failed single section, because I've already pre-planned what I'm going to do if he does this. My entry is come in here, like I'm always focused on, head to or shoulder to the hip, head across, get to the leg, try to go for the low single, I can't get it, no problem. I come to the dump. They start to back off. Okay, I start going single to double. I start stepping through. Oh, they step to the wrong way? Okay, knee pick. You don't have to do what Daniel Cormier does. You just have to be a little bit thoughtful and plan it out. Now, what he did worked great for him because he was so much shorter. He'd come inside, get to the single leg. He wasn't worried about guys trying to catch his head or something like that because he could always step across and finish it. He wasn't worried about that. And not to mention the fact he tended to go really high with his head to help prevent guillotine threats or keep low enough to the body so it was hard to catch him. So it was hard to kind of obtain a guillotine in the first place. Guys would try to frame his head away and stuff like that, but in that case, it didn't really help because he'd start turning them, and so they had to start going, oh, I've got to be dealing with this threat to try to stop it. And while they were going side to side trying to stop that, next thing you know, he'd get under him, lift him, high crotch, put him down on the deck. It worked really, really well. So that is the majority of what he did for wrestling. Now, there were some other things that you would see him switch to because, he's a two-time Olympian, All-American wrestler. Obviously, he knows a thing or two about a thing or two. But the basic mechanics of what he was looking for was essentially that. Let's talk about the ground a little bit, finish up here. Couple things. Generally speaking, what you would see a lot is when he'd get guys on the ground, a lot of times, if guys started going on their knees, he'd do a lot of putting a knee on the inside, catching the hip, striking, putting them up against the cage and pinning them there, and as they started to try to defend, he'd come over, take them back. That was a really common attack of his. If they went back down and he ended up on top of them, a lot of times it was getting to a top half position, and what he did a lot of is really interesting. He would come up here, get the underhook, stay heavy, pin this arm with his free leg, and just use that to try to get his other leg free, and then he'd end up in a crucifix and start doing damage, forcing a turn away, getting to the back, finishing either trying to choke or just on top throwing bombs. And once again, it was another good instance of when he was at half guard, it was throwing bombs to distract you from my doing a pass. Once I'm doing the pass and you're defending against that, I go back to throwing bombs because you're not defending that, right? It's that threat of the two of them. And then he would just get on top, pound people, or choke them. Pretty simple. It wasn't rocket science. He did the same thing basically every time, but it worked for him. The few times that you did see him end up on his back, his solution was very simple. Most of the time it seemed to be up against the cage. And from here, you'd see a lot of stuff like getting to his knees, keeping any hands cleared, and then just coming up here and standing up. And it was almost like a stand-up from a referee's position is what he would end up doing. He would just do it from against the cage, so that as they're pinning him here, removing any hands that were in the way, stripping him, holding onto it, and just standing up, turning in to face him. That was basically it. But, man, what a brilliant guy this was. Watching him wrestle was unparalleled because he would take guys that seemed like they were so big or so dexterous that you couldn't imagine him taking these guys down, and he did with ease because he just stayed to a simple chain wrestling system. And this is what I want to encourage in you, is to think of the favorite entry that you have. Think about how you're going to get to that position. For me, it's a lot of doing reactive shots. I draw punching, and as they come in, I go for the reactive shot. With him, he wanted to press forward and be on the inside, so he just created a way to safely always be there with no risk to himself. That's what I want to encourage you to do. Think about ways to take the risk out of your takedown, turn those into solutions, start chaining these together, know what the common obstacles are, and use that against them. And that's what he did. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure you're sharing, and if you have somebody you want to see me break down, make sure you throw it in the comments.